So, it's been pointed out that the last couple of episodes of The Backdrop have been kinda grim. And while that is perhaps a reflection of the world in which we live and the current state of the industry, we thought that this week we'd take a break from all that and talk about some good news. In particular, one of the good news stories for the past year or so is that, within the specifically narrow band of cinema attendance, the kids are, in fact, alright. There have been consistent survey results demonstrating that Gen Z have a clear and abiding love of cinema, that they want to go to the theater to see movies, and that while they won't necessarily turn up out of obligation to franchises that were a big deal before they were born, they will see films that matter to them. So, what kind of films are the kids turning out to see? It seems like video game movies are all the rage. And since this is ostensibly a video game channel, I thought I'd talk this week about a video game movie that I really enjoyed. No, not you. Yeah, that one. Exit 8? More like Exit Great. Enjoying a limited theatrical release in the States a week ago, Exit 8 focuses on an anonymous protagonist trapped in a seemingly unending subway corridor, where he's confronted with variations of the same corridor over and over and over and over and over, and you get it, again. In order to escape, he must correctly navigate the same corridor 8 times, pressing forward if it is identical to the original specification, and turning back if he encounters what is called an anomaly. If he makes a mistake, the counter resets to 0 and he has to start all over again. To get back to the whole younger audiences of it all, studies suggest that the kids love horror. And in particular, they love a certain kind of horror typified by Exit 8, which has come to be known as liminal horror. It is a subgenre focused on eerie, transitional, places between places that feel somehow familiar yet vaguely uncanny. Train stations, hotels, empty malls, that sort of thing. There have been a rake of recent films and television shows based around the concept of a liminal space. Kane Parson, for example, is adapting his YouTube horror Backrooms into a feature film about a furniture store owner who discovers a door at the back of his shop that opens into an impossibly expansive series of unending corridors. Midway through the first season of Chainsaw Man, the characters find themselves stuck in an infinite and recursive 8th floor of a hotel. In the video game adaptation Until Dawn, a group of young characters find themselves trapped in a remote bed and breakfast, forced to live the same night over and over again. In the television series From, characters find themselves trapped in a small town where every road out inevitably leads back in again. There are also shades of it to the labyrinth of strange interconnected corridors that the staff find themselves navigating in Severance. In theaters, Forbidden Fruits is set in an eerie mall. Coming out towards the end of the month, Hokum unfolds in an uncanny hotel. Hell, it might even be possible to stretch this definition to include other recent horror movies with spaces that shouldn't be liminal, but end up feeling liminal nonetheless. The entirety of the movie Undertone, for example, follows a woman staying in her dying mother's house, an environment that is constantly framed to feel both expansive and claustrophobic, with voyeuristic shots through doorways that emphasize mirrors and French doors in a way that makes the space feel impossibly large and incredibly contained at the same time. Given it's a horror movie about hidden messages in podcasts, I guess you could say it's subliminal horror. Iron Lung follows a main character who is trapped inside a one-person submarine, and spends the entire movie locked in that space slowly going mad. Obviously, there have been movies like this before. Groundhog Day popularized the idea of the time loop movie, and it has seen a resurgence with films like Palm Springs, Happy Death Day, Before I Fall, Two Distant Strangers, The Map of Tiny Perfect Things, The Final Girls. Indeed, it's possible to see this modern resurgence in the time loop genre as part of the evolution of liminal horror, where it's no longer just about repeated time, but also about repeated space. There are plenty of genre films and shows in which the characters find themselves trapped in a confined or uncanny location. From Vincenzo Natali's Cube, to Nimrod Antel's Predators, to the entire concept of the television show Lost. Indeed, this wave of recent horror movies feels very indebted to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, a horror movie set in an eerie, empty hotel over winter, haunted by the ghosts of its past. There's a lot of The Shining in Exit 8. Going back even further, one could see this modern wave of liminal horror as a modern take on classic folklore about fairies or spirits or other supernatural entities that would frequently lure mortals into strange realms and trap them there. Just even in the context of this video, it's worth acknowledging that this sort of folkloric horror movie has seen something of a minor resurgence in recent years as well. So, liminal horror did not emerge whole cloth out of nothing. It has a clear historical precedent within the larger horror genre. but it also has a distinct identity within that, enough to merit consideration on its own terms. Why does this modern iteration of this classic horror story look like a looping subway corridor? Or endless pristine white work corridors? Or endless beige storage space? This approach feels pronounced enough in recent media to be a clear trend. So, we're going to talk about that this week. This will involve talking about Exit 8 in relative depth, including discussing some aspects of the ending and some adaptational choices, so consider yourself warned. But more broadly, we're going to talk about this emerging genre, why it resonates with younger audiences, and what it says about the modern world. Because, it's good to stay in the loop. To start with, it's worth acknowledging that several of these projects are based on video games. Exit 8, Until Dawn, Iron Lung. This makes a certain amount of narrative sense in purely pragmatic terms. The infinite pre-programmed loop is just the conversion of a video game mechanic into a narrative device. Even the movies that aren't adapting video games tend to feel like video games, with the characters either advancing or starting over, and the loop becomes a way of building that into the premise. This, incidentally, is why that Tom Cruise time loop movie is the best video game movie ever made, despite not actually being based on a video game. It's a film about resets and save points and pattern recognition, capturing a large part of the mechanics of playing a video game.
I thought stepping left, ducking, just for the record, stepping left,
ducking right, stepping right, stepping left, ducking right.
However, it's also worth acknowledging that not every video game adaptation employs a mechanic like this. It is not part of the recent Super Mario Galaxy movie, for example. It has not been part of any Mortal Kombat adaptation to date. As such, including that mechanic is a narrative choice, as is choosing to adapt the games that depend on it. It feels like these games resonate in part because their dependence on that mechanic speaks to audiences. This is perhaps the most obvious read. While some of these liminal horrors predate the pandemic and lockdowns, for example Lorcan Finnegan's Vivarium, this emphasis on liminal spaces cannot help but speak to young people's memories of living through that uncertain time, trapped in family homes, or hotels, or even small towns unable to escape. Basically that very emotional feeling of being trapped in a single location by a non-corporeal force. There is an existential horror underpinning this that bleeds through in films like Exit 8 or Until Dawn. Stories of characters seemingly trapped alone or in small groups in a confined space, while also expected to somehow keep moving forward within it, to create the illusion of momentum or progress while stuck in place. The pandemic remains a fraught topic, impossible to discuss without entering some sort of weird culture war. As a result, it is largely avoided in popular conversation. This may explain why there have been so many movies recently about grief, particularly from the perspective of or aimed at children or teenagers. Almost as if they're modeling grief for a generation that has not been taught to deal with it by larger society. It is a very uncanny thing. To pick one specific country, the pandemic killed more Americans than all foreign wars combined. Yet it is not memorialized in the same way. Many monuments around the world are maintained by bereaved families without support from the state, and so this inability to even talk about it leads to the anxiety and trauma being sublimated. There's a real sense that the younger generation has not yet fully recovered from the trauma of that experience. And, more broadly, culture's unwillingness to directly address that cannot be making things easier. With this in mind, it makes sense that breathing is a recurring anxiety within so many of these projects. That Trapped in a Submarine movie is quite literally called Iron Lung. The anonymous protagonist of Exit 8 not only has to worry about drowning in a mysterious flood, he also suffers from asthma. His panicked breathing is one way that the film generates suspense. It's also worth noting that Exit 8 ends with that character on his way to a hospital. This is a sublimated anxiety, but it is definitely there. That said, it is perhaps trite to pin all of this on displaced anxiety resulting from the pandemic and the resulting lockdown. These films tap into other latent fears that resonate with younger audiences. Gen Z is, after all, a generation that was raised in the ultimate uncanny liminal space, the internet. The internet is, after all, a vast and perhaps infinite pool of constantly shifting data and connections, where nothing is truly permanent, and even the most mundane images cannot be trusted. What are the liminal spaces of Exit 8 or Backrooms, if not literal expressions of the most basic form of creepypasta? A word that is itself a corruption of copy-paste, itself an expression of the internet's tendency to just get clogged up with repetitive nonsense that occasionally degrades and corrupts over iterations. The subway corridor in Exit 8 is quite literally copy and pasted, with occasional anomalies or degradations to the data creeping in. The endless corridors in the backrooms are seemingly just repetitions of corrupted patterns. YouTuber Dan Olson did a really excellent video on Facebook's metaverse, and he described it in these terms.
If this is the future, then the future is a dead mall.
These uncanny liminal spaces are perhaps a literalization of that idea, a corruption of the now long gone third spaces in the real world like malls, where people could just hang out in person with each other. The death of third places is a recurring anxiety in modern pop culture. Recently, for example, the second season of Poker Face seemed in large part a love letter to these communal places that were slowly dying, like baseball stadiums, gyms, and even supermarkets.
And look, I know this might sound corny, but I like to think of Super Save as being this modern day town square, because people want to gather. People want rituals, human connection.
The internet is a lot like the mall from George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead, but rendered even more uncanny. There's an increasingly mainstream belief, which is known as the dead internet theory, that suggests that most online activity is actually driven by bots and algorithms, meaning that even this facsimile of a shared space is haunted by something distinctly inhuman. Exit 8 opens with a first-person perspective shot of the lead character scrolling Twitter, traveling the subway with his headphones in. He's already in his own pocket universe of infinite scroll. Being trapped in a corridor of infinite stroll feels like an organic escalation. On this point, it's worth noting that many of the anomalies from later in the movie appear in the protagonist's Twitter feed in the opening shot. Rodents with human organs growing on them, asymmetrical corridor lighting, and even the flood itself. The movie is in large part about either the character being trapped in his phone, or his phone breaking reality. It's worth acknowledging that the phone is a recurring preoccupation within Exit 8. Ironically, both as a connection to and a distraction from the outside world. Our protagonist screens his calls, swipes onto trains, and even pays at vending machines all through his phone. The phone is a portal away from reality. Midway through the film, he recounts a key beat from the opening scene, in which an angry man attacked a mother for failing to quiet her baby on the subway. Our hero rather pointedly observes,
誰も助けないんだ。スマホばっか見ててさ。
Rather pointedly, the closing moments of the film have him remove his headphones and literally look away from his phone. There's a tendency to describe any horror movie with any surrealist or abstract elements as inherently Lynchian, but in this one very specific respect, Exit 8 is most definitely Lynchian.
Fucking telephone. Get real.
On that note, there is a sense of existential loneliness permeating these liminal horror films, the fear that it is possible to be entirely alone within what should be a public space. This is part of the tension in Undertone, in which the lead character is a podcaster who speaks to the world on her weekly show, but who lives alone with her dying mother in the old family home. Hokum takes place in a hotel, which should be bustling with guests, but isn't. In Exit 8, subway stations should be crowded, and the opening scenes reinforce this idea of a packed commute. But instead, the lead character finds himself completely alone within this eternal looping corridor. Of course, there's a businessman who walks around on each loop, but that character never really engages. He never says hello. If he acknowledges the lead character, whether by smiling or by following him, it is an anomaly, a glitch in the fabric of reality. This preoccupation with loneliness, even in crowded spaces and even through simulacra of connection like the internet or phones, resonates with younger audiences, and studies suggest that Gen Z is the loneliest generation. One of the clever twists in Exit 8 is the film's suggestion that there are multiple characters trapped in this eternal cycle, that the aforementioned businessman is trapped in his own repeating hell. But those individuals are largely disconnected from each other, even as they share what is ostensibly a public and communal space. There is, baked into this, an implicit critique of the alienating and dehumanizing effects of late capitalism. These unending Baroque labyrinths are a surrealist extrapolation of the more mundane infinite loop of doing the same thing day in and day out within a complex, intricate system that often fails to provide for an individual's basic needs. Of riding subways that all look the same, populated by men who all look the same, and getting off them to walk through corridors that all look the same. At a certain point, even the days themselves start to all look the same. In Backrooms, the eponymous backrooms open out the back of a furniture store in a strip mall. In Severance, these unending corridors and surreal spaces are explicitly part of the corporate structure of a vast corporation that has grown so diffuse that even its employees have no idea what it actually does. They just look at the numbers.
Each category of numbers presents in such an order as to elicit an emotional response in the refiner. Cat 1 numbers, for example, feel a certain way on sight. They'll be sort of disconcerting, scary.
My job is to scroll through this spreadsheet and look for numbers that are scary.
In Exit 8, the only other person that the lead character passes in the loop looks like a businessman, wearing a clean white shirt and carrying a briefcase. He could be seen as an existential specter of an imagined future for the lead, an older man who is stuck in his own repeating loop. The film makes this literal, taking a literal sidestep to follow that character through his own loop, in which he is very directly confronted with that existential horror.
毎日ぎゅうぎゅう詰めの電車乗って会社行って同じこと繰り返してそっちの方が地獄みたいでかわいそう
This must be what a regular job looks like to Gen Z, particularly in the modern world, where that sort of job no longer provides enough financial stability to pay a mortgage or support a family. It really must seem pointless and endless and meaningless. With all this in mind, can we really be surprised when surveys consistently show Gen Z's disillusionment with capitalism? It really must feel like an endless repetitive loop where they play by all the rules but are denied any opportunity for escape. It's telling that the businessman ends up trapped in the loop forever when he ascends the staircase, presumably to go to his job. In contrast, once our protagonist escapes the loop, the first thing that he does is to turn around, to walk away from the job that he was on his way to, and to hop on the same train that brought him here, and to effectively give up on playing by the rules of a broken system. This neatly brings us to the Gen Z of it all. Exit 8 suggests that, for the protagonist, life itself exists in a perpetual liminal state. Nothing is certain for him, even before he's trapped in the loop. The loop is a nightmare manifestation of his everyday existence. At the start of the film, he receives a phone call from a woman. He explains that he is on his way to his temp job. She explains that they are not really together. Nothing is certain. Everything is fungible. There is no stability or consistency or reliability. From the perspective of Gen Z, the laws that govern the social contract or interpersonal relationships have become abstracted and ambiguous. Nobody's really sure who they are to anybody else anymore. The basic structures of society have unraveled. In such a world, even trying to walk down a simple corridor becomes an exercise in trying to catch some signifier of the uncanny that may or may not be present. What fresh, horrific surprises are waiting behind this corner? What seemingly ordinary facet of a normal life is now broken in ways that would previously have been beyond human comprehension? Even the mundane has become unknowable and alien. So navigating the world means keeping an eye out for anomalies. There's a creeping sense that the world the younger generation has inherited is built upon a lie. Millennials were, for example, the first generation since the end of the Second World War to end up more likely than not worse off than their parents. This has to be disillusioning. It is worth acknowledging that a lot of the studies and surveys that we've quoted in this video tend to be focused on the American or British experience. But there is ample evidence that these trends are global in nature. Exit 8 is a Japanese movie adapting a Japanese video game. And it's worth acknowledging that young people in Asia in general, and Japan in particular, are similarly disaffected and disillusioned. They are quiet quitting, they are staying at home, they are rejecting myths of national exceptionalism. But even outside of that, these liminal horrors have found global audiences, resonating with something universal in contemporary youth culture. In such a context, it makes sense that the horror stories that speak to and resonate with younger audiences would be built around making the mundane feel uncanny. All that said, it's worth positioning Exit 8 in the context of another recent popular horror subgenre. Ultimately, this is a film about parental anxieties. The movie starts with an argument over a baby on a train. The cries of a baby are a constant refrain within the maze. At one point, the lead encounters a small child that he has to protect and guide through the maze in what is a fairly heavy-handed metaphor for parenting. When he panics, a hallucination of his partner assures him in what feels like a thesis statement for the metaphor underpinning the movie, the phone call that sets off this panic attack of a movie involves the revelation that the lead character's perhaps girlfriend is pregnant. At a certain point, Exit 8 becomes about the impossibility of trying to navigate an irrational and often openly hostile world while protecting a child. It's not the most subtle metaphor for raising a child in the current moment, but it is effective. It also resonates with a wave of the year's more interesting films tapping into these same basic anxieties. Films exploring the anxieties of what it is to be a parent and the challenges of keeping a child safe in a chaotic and turbulent world. It's also a fear that resonates with younger audiences, and studies suggest that Gen Z are anxious about bringing children into a world affected by forces like climate change. Tellingly, in Exit 8, the man and the boy are ultimately separated by a flash flood. It also ties in thematically to the film's obsession with loops. Having a child forces an adult to accept the passage of time. Children grow, and very quickly. Last year, Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another built a lot of its publicity around the code words exchanged by its would-be revolutionaries.
There are no hands on the clock.
Why?
Because they're not needed.
And the main character, who has spent the past 16 years raising his daughter, fails to remember the last password in the chain. When he discovers what it is,
Time doesn't exist, yet it controls us anyway.
the film suggests that there's a good reason that it didn't stick with him.
You obviously don't have kids, you fucking idiot!
Ultimately, children are reminders that, even if it seems like we are stuck in a particular moment or space, the world must keep moving forward, and we need to move along with it. In some ways, this is just an acceleration of all the other themes percolating through the movie. The fear of what it means to bring a child into, or to be expected to bring a child into, a world that makes less and less sense every day. A world that feels less stable than it did even 15 years ago, let alone 30. And a world that often feels like it is literally either on fire or drowning. Part of the beauty of surrealist horror is the way that it taps into a variety of fears, conscious and unconscious, and expresses them in ways that feel effective. The truth is that trends are often multifactorial, the result of multiple forces at work in pop culture, harmonizing in unexpected or unpredictable ways. In truth, Exit 8 and the wider liminal horror boom are about all of those things. The influence of video game storytelling on cinema, the processing of post-pandemic trauma, the way the internet has eroded reality, the existential loneliness that one can feel even in communal spaces, the mundane horrors of late capitalism, the fact that so much of Gen Z's existence feels liminal, and broader parental anxieties. Appropriately enough, liminal horror exists suspended between all of these influences and factors. It's a set of anxieties that resonate with younger audiences, filtering their own experience of the world through the lens of abstract horror. As far as Gen Z is concerned, it's absolute cinema. I've been Darren Mooney, and this was, and forever will be, The Backdrop.